Welcome, one and all, to the fight of the century. This feud has been brewing for years, and today is the day that we finally find out who will be victorious. Which generation is the best? In this corner, we have the Millennials and their opponents. In this corner, Generation Z, or Z, however you want to pronounce it. This is going to be the most epic fight of the century. Stay tuned if you want to see who will be victorious. It's really the age-old question. Who is the better generation? The Millennials or Generation Z? Well, since I am a part of Generation Z, thus the podcast, Me and Gen Z, I can't exactly make an unbiased decision. So I'm going to leave that up to you guys. But before you make your decision, I'm going to give you some facts and comparisons that you can use so that you make a very educated decision on this very, very important topic. Okay. Now, before I start, for all of you watching on YouTube, I would like you to go down to the comment section and comment which generation you are a part of, even if it's not one of the two I'm discussing, and then comment one thing that you think is really cool or great about your generation, and then comment one thing about your generation that you think, not so great. If you're listening on the podcast, for the podcast listeners, you can comment on any of the posts on my social medias that you already know about, okay? And you need to remember while you're down there in the comments, you YouTube folks, to subscribe so you don't miss out on all the other fun things that I do, and also just give this video a thumbs up because you like it. Okay, guys, with all of that out of the way, Millennials, Gen Z, let's get into it. Couple of sources. I think about 3 sources that I'm going to discuss today. So the first source that I stumbled upon on Google, because that's what we do now, we Google things. Okay, I'm just checking my notes here. And they are a company that does market research, so they look at marketing specifically and how to target marketing towards different generations. So the results they found about the differences between Gen Z and Millennials are more geared towards marketing, but I still think it's quite fascinating to see how the differences between how we shop and all of those things. Okay, so they point out that a key difference between the generations and why they have different experiences with regards to shopping and that sort of thing is because Millennials kind of grew up or were raised during an economic boom, whereas Gen Z grew up or are growing up or were raised in more of a recession. Okay, so they note that is one of the very big reasons why there is such a difference, especially with regards to the way that they spend money. According to this source, Millennials also seem to be a bit more idealistic, and Millennials, Generation Z, tend to be more pragmatic or realistic because of the different circumstances within which they were raised. Obviously, that is not for every single person of that generation. It's just a tendency that they see. Okay, so let's see what this source, like I said, who is more focused on marketing, what did they found. I am not speaking great English today because I'm trying to read my notes, look into the camera, and not Okay, let's try this again. For you listening on the podcast, you have no idea what's going on the video right now. Be glad. But okay, let's look into what this company found when they looked at, the difference of the buying of things between millennials and Gen Z. Okay, so according to the 2020 Salesforce research, 50%, that's 50% of millennials said they trust companies versus only 42% of Generation Z, which not a big difference, but still a difference. But I think this is because Generation Z just, tends to have general trust issues. I'm talking from experience here. We don't trust no one here in Generation Z, okay? To conclude, they also found that Generation Z will be more concerned with saving money. They attribute this to the fact that most of Generation Z grew up during a recession, and they will thus spend their money in places or on products that give them the best value for money. So something that perhaps has more than one purpose. Whereas millennials are more than willing to spend a lot of more money for the experience. So even though you can get the same thing at two different places, millennials will more likely go to the more expensive place if the buying experience for them is a better experience. Okay, so that is just kind of a difference with regards to buying and how the different generations spend their money. Okay, so we're moving on to the second source that I looked at, and they looked a bit more at the generations with regards to education and the workplace. There's not a lot of things that they give, like statistically, but they do give some information with regards to differences that they found when they looked into this. Okay. So they did a survey of about 1,001 Americans that ranged from their late teens to their mid-20s. And they found one or two differences, which is normal because no one person is going to be the same. And obviously a larger age range between the generations, there are going to be more differences. So they found that Generation Z will tend to be more concerned with the cost of education than millennials tend to be. That is why we see all of these jokes and memes, and actually a very serious topic about millennials with regards to student loan debt. Whereas Gen Z is a lot more concerned with the cost of education. We also can attribute that to, like we said with the first source, the fact that Gen Z grew up during a recession. So they are a lot more concerned with regards to monetary value of things, and monetary that's the word, and how much things cost. Okay, which millennials did not really have that concern because they grew up in the economic boom. Now, the second thing they found, which really confused me a bit, is that millennials will crave stability, whereas Generation Z will kind of hold out for their dream job. And now, the reason this statement is a little is weird for me, because at first they say, Gen Z grew up during a recession. They tend to be more focused on spending their money wisely. They're really concerned with the costs of things, yet they will rather hold out for their dream job than just getting a job and being financially stable, which millennials like to do. They like to, but if you can also take it this way, because millennials went to college, got the student debt, and then got into a job. So you can perhaps make the conclusion that millennials like to follow the traditional pattern of you go to school, you go to college, you get a job, and that's kind of, whereas Gen Z has been with the different things that they grew up with, find it easier to hold out for a dream job, perhaps not even going to college. So you can also look at it that way. I just want to add in that all these sources that I found or found the information from is in the description. So if you want to go have a look at that, maybe read through it, maybe you come to a different conclusion than I did, please do comment what you learn, what your perspective is. I love learning from people, hear different perspectives. You know, maybe we can have a conversation and we can both learn something. So please, the description, the sources are in the description, so go check it out if you want to. And then maybe if you have a different conclusion than mine, please do leave a comment. Okay, so the final source that I found really tackled some of the things that I talk about a lot on this podcast, especially. So I'm going to be spending a little bit more time on this specific one because they also really break down some of the things really well. So I really want to spend some time on this one. The article was really long, but I'm just going to summarize or highlight some of the things that I usually talk about and how they break it down. YouTube watchers, like I said, all of the sources are in the description if you want to go read up on the whole article. Okay, little side note, the article that I'm about to talk about was written in 2018, so I do know that maybe things have changed throughout the years, but I think most of the things that they talk about are pretty accurate and can still be applied today, but I just thought I'd mention that. Okay, so I think there are about 2 or 3 points with this article that I want to discuss, and the first point that I really want to discuss has to do with stress. So let's get into some of the stats first. According to this article, okay, and I'm reading on my notes for you watching on YouTube, I'm sorry, but I don't want to get any of the stats wrong. This article, and remember this is with regards to stress, it showed that 60% of millennials are content with their lives compared to only 47% of Generation Z. That is, in my opinion, a large difference. From 60% of millennials to 47% of Gen Z being content with their lives. This is just... okay, I'm going to leave most of my thoughts for later. Let's just look at some more of the stats here. Further, they found that 67% of millennials feel that their lives are full of purpose compared to 53% of Gen Z. So only 53% of Generation Z feel that there is purpose in their lives. With millennials, it's 67%, which is a lot more. Okay, it's just insane. From here, it is easy to conclude that Generation Z obviously will be a bit more stressed because, I mean, you can just look at the numbers. And about 58% of Generation Z said that they experience at least moderate stress in their daily lives. 58%, that is more than half. I mean, I know I'm smart, right? More than half of Gen Z, or the people that they ask from Gen Z, experience at least moderate stress in their lives. I mean, so according to this article, Generation Z tend to worry more about things like their futures, any sort of relationship issues, whether with friends or romantic relationship. Gen Z is also very concerned with their appearance and their safety. So I want to discuss this, but like I said, let's just get through most of the article first, okay? So according to this article, because Generation Z tends to have higher stress levels than previous generations, it has made them more active and adventurous. So that is kind of a positive spin because they try to get rid of their stress by being active or adventurous in order to make sure that the stress doesn't completely overwhelm them. But the other side of this is that they also do it for social currency, because posting pictures, new adventures, doing new and exciting things, you post it on social media, you're going to get a lot of likes, which is social currency these days. And I mean, apparently that's what we're all into these days. So maybe the being active and going on adventures is good for stress relief, but you're adding that stress right back by saying, okay, I need to do something new and exciting to post on social media so that I can get a lot of likes. Okay? And this actually gives us a good segue into the second point in this article that I really want to discuss, and that is social media. Okay, so if you've watched or listened to any of the episodes, you know that I talk about social media quite a lot. So it actually came to a really big surprise to me, as a really big surprise to me. I promise I do know how to speak English, okay? According to this article, millennials are more likely to use social media than Gen Z. So Gen Z is actually less likely to use social media, which, I mean, I was a little surprised. I mean, what is it that we say right now? I was shook. Do you see that I am not at all in touch with my generation? Yeah, that did actually surprise me a bit. But they do explain this, and that kind of makes sense, is that for millennials, social media was a new, exciting thing because for a part of their lives, they didn't have social media. And then when it came out, it was new, it was exciting. So they jumped on it and it was really cool. So millennials tend to use it really a lot more than Gen Z because most of Gen Z always had social media in their lives. So it wasn't as exciting. It wasn't as new. For example, if we look at Facebook, which according to data, a lot more millennials are on Facebook than Gen Z, or a lot more active on Facebook than Gen Z, okay? So that kind of makes sense. It wasn't as new for Gen Z as it was for the millennials. So that kind of makes sense. Then another interesting thing with regards to social media is that Gen Z actually really prefer social media apps with a bit more privacy. So they think some social media platforms are just really too public, whereas if you post something, notifications are sent out to the entire world. So according to this article, Gen Z will rather use something like Snapchat where they can control what people see rather than Facebook because, you know, it's for their own privacy, which, I mean, I know now you get a lot of privacy settings. This article was written in 2018, but now you get a lot of privacy settings, I get it. But apparently Gen Z is really, really concerned about their privacy and will thus use social media platforms that provide them a little bit more privacy. An interesting statistic in this article says that 32% of millennials will post online updates compared to only 15% of Gen Z. Gen Z are also less likely to write reviews of any kind. So 32% of millennials post online updates compared to only 15% of Gen Z people. So that is just something to think about. I mean, now, another thing that this article does talk about is the difference in parenting styles under which millennials grew up versus how Gen Z grew up. And obviously you can take that back to the very first thing we spoke about, where millennials grew up in an economic boom and Gen Z grew up in a recession. But since I'm not a parent and since I haven't researched the effects of different parenting styles enough, I don't really want to comment on that too much, but you can go read the article. Like I said, if you're watching on YouTube, the description, the sources are in the description, so you can kind of make your own conclusions with that. Now, I did sprinkle in some of my thoughts during this whole thing, but I do just want to have a quick ending where I, share some of my final thoughts before we completely end today's episode. Okay, so just some of my final thoughts. The first point that I brought up about Gen Z growing up in a recession really does explain why Gen Z does experience a lot more stress, because they really are concerned about their futures because of the way that they grew up, where, things were difficult. So I think the stress of the future for Gen Z can really be does stem from the fact that they grew up during a recession. Now, I also think even though social media is the norm for Gen Z, it does add more pressure than previous generations experience. Like we said in, I think, is it the final one or the second? Yeah, I think it was the final source, where they said that one of the things Gen Z really stresses about is their appearance. Now, I think this can be taken because of the fact that social media is the norm. With previous generations, also millennials included, you went to high school and the pressure on your appearance was basically from what you saw in magazines perhaps, which, I mean, okay, you can probably take that, but it's not as common as social media, and your peers and your parents, which, I mean, still is pressure and does add stress to your life. But with Gen Z, they get pressure literally from the entire world, because there are people from their age group over the entire world posting on social media. It's a part of their lives. It's normal for them, and that does add stress. That does add pressure. So I think that is one of the reasons that Gen Z does have more stress. Okay, so guys, I think this is a good... Oh yeah, one final point I want to make. I am a part of Gen Z, so that is why I do focus more on Gen Z, but I did add some of the facts from millennials as well. So if you're a millennial, you know, you just learned something about yourself. I just think that with Gen Z, because there's so much information on the internet, social media, etc., it's a really, really difficult thing, because we are taught to fit in with a group, to find something or some people that, you know, like the same things as us, but we also need to be unique enough to stand out. And I think that just adds a lot more pressure. I'm not saying no one else experiences this pressure. I just think it's really, really big in Generation Z. Okay, so I'm not gonna decide the best generation, because like I said, I am biased. I am a part of Generation Z, but you guys can battle it out in the comments, but be nice about it. Tell me who you think the best generation is. Also, which generation are you a part of, and one good and one bad thing about your generation. For you on YouTube, you can do that on the YouTube comment section. You listening to the podcast, you can find me on social media and comment there. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching today's episode. It was a bit different, a little bit just more lighthearted, learning some new things about ourselves. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment if you like this video, and if you don't want to miss out on any of the other fun things that I do on this channel. I will see you guys in the next video. Have a lovely